everybody. It is Dean Z speaking to you from Jeffries Hall at the University of Michigan Law School. We're back, baby. I have been knee deep, nope, shoulder deep, nope, eyebrow deep in reading applications for many months now, but that is finally a thing, temporarily anyway, of the past. And so Dustin and I are back here together. This is apparently a new lens. Dustin says it's his favorite. He's been hiding that from me. So I hope you're enjoying that. But we're here today to answer a bunch of questions that have come into the YouTube channel that we have been sadly neglecting while we were doing other things. So let's call this the beginning of season 5, and let's start off with some Q&A, shall we? All right, first question that we're tackling is from Soccer Bagel 18. Curious about that. Okay. I was wondering if you prefer resumes to be in chronological order or by order of importance, and also if we are doing multiple things currently, should those be chronological by start date or in order of importance? Great question. Chronological. When you're looking at a resume, when I'm looking at it, or anybody really, what they want to know is sort of the order of progression that you've been doing things. Chronological is the by far and away most important thing, and it should be most recent thing at the top. I see a surprising number of resumes where people, the first thing that they list is the first thing they've ever done. I get that logically, but that's not how people who are looking at resumes are expecting to see things. So that's confusing. So do it in chronological order. And if there is something that you really want to emphasize because you think it's the most important, then you should either divvy things up a little so that it's, you've got different categories. You could say work experience versus volunteer experience, or research experience versus something else, or legal experience, or whatever it is. And then you can put that section at the top and emphasize the thing that is, most important from your point of view. But in general, if you're doing it in chronological order, you will often be, because we progress through our careers, often the most recent thing is the most important thing. And then if you have multiple things at the same time, yes, organize by start date. That is the right way to do that. So thanks for that question, Soccer Bagel 18. Next, we have a question from Mary, which I suspect is this person's name, whereas I don't think Soccer Bagel 18 was the person's name. So, quick question. Does volunteer work experience count? I work as a volunteer Sunday school teacher, and while sometimes I do paid gigs, it's mostly on a part-time volunteer basis. Absolutely, volunteer work is work, right? I don't care what you're earning per hour. So I think it is good to show that it is volunteer, so that you're not implying anything erroneous, but you're doing something valuable with your time. It is an important reflection of what you are doing with your days and evenings and whatever. So absolutely include volunteer experience, and I consider that work. Although I also think it's fine to have a volunteer section. You divide it up in whatever way makes sense to you based on your particular work pattern. But yes, thumbs up to volunteer counting as work. Next, Anton. How often do you have applicants who have already earned other advanced degrees? And then he specifies PhDs and MDs apply to Michigan Law School. So we have a ton of master's degree people who apply. I mean, a ton. I'd say 12 to 15% of an entering class might have a master's degree. PhDs are relatively rare. I'd say maybe I have 3 to 5 people in a given class who has a PhD, and MDs are extremely rare. I probably have had no more than 10 MDs over the course of my time in admissions in an entering class. In the pool, of course, it's a little larger than that, but it's relatively rare. So if you have a PhD or an MD, that's a significant credential that is very distinctive, if that's why you're asking. Okay, next we have, I like this one, Dr. Professor X. Okay. I think that majors should be considered when talking about GPAs and low GPA, because 3.45 GPA in mechanical engineering is significantly harder than even 3.99 in poli-sci or sociology. First of all, Dr. Professor X, you are hurting the feelings of the many poli-sci and sociology people who are watching this video. Second of all, I don't disagree. Yeah, I know mechanical engineering and other hard sciences and engineering degrees tend to have a strict curve in the way that other liberal arts majors tend not to. So I know that, and I know, I think I've said this before though, I feel deeply in my bones that engineers and scientists are smarter than the rest of us. And why they aren't running the world is a little bit of a mystery to me. But yes, this is definitely, bottom line, yeah, this is definitely one of the things we're taking into account when we are looking at a lower GPA. Like, that's a great reason for looking past a lower GPA, because you had a crazy hard major. So, correct. All right, next we have Ryan Liu. Question for future video. Do law school admissions offices ever reach out to references for clarification or more info? I think that is relatively rare, that you would reach out to the actual person writing a letter on behalf of someone. I'm not going to say it never happens, but it is rare. I think it would be more likely that I would reach out to the candidate if I wanted some clarification. So, can you count on references never being reached out to? No, I don't think you can. But if you were going to bet, I think you'd be safe that it wouldn't happen. Okay. Here's another one. Judge Judith. Do applicants ever submit joint letters of recommendation? For example, 2 work supervisors on the same letter, or would it be better just to ask them separately? Great question. Actually, this happens pretty frequently. Where I see it happen a lot is when someone is a TA or a graduate student instructor, they and the professor who's overseeing the class as a whole might write jointly. The professor might say, a lot of this is coming from the GSI, or the GSI might say, this is me writing, but the professor is signing off, something like that. So I actually think that's a perfectly fine solution, depending on what the work scenario is or the way the references know you. I think that's a great way to proceed. So yes. I love this one, chaotically lawful. I'm curious why Michigan and other law schools choose to utilize their own status checkers rather than the one that is a more standardized format. Great question. It's really quite technical and, honestly, probably pretty boring if I went into great detail. But it's basically because just the way we have an internal data warehouse, and we have different coding that we use for different statuses that is different than the coding that is the default coding that LSAC uses. And just internally, it doesn't work well for us to use LSAC. So I recognize that's a little bit of a hassle from the point of view of an applicant, but it would be a big hassle for us to try to make our system adhere to the LSAC system. Every school's, a little different. And so we just like our system. So that's why. Jonathan asks, Jonathan happens to be the name of my brother, by the way. Would you ever do an application reading with the applicant? Could be fun to hear their perspective as you talk through what they submitted. Things like why they chose a particular essay topic. I agree. I think that does sound fun. We're talking about it. It'd have to be the right person. It'd have to be someone who, wants to be on camera taking constructive feedback from me, and who might, who would enjoy it and would be fun to have. But so I love it as an idea, but I have yet to pursue it. But yeah, I'm right there with you. Okay. Lewis asks a question that required me to do a little research, because Lewis asks, quote, seems so out of touch. What about community college students who did not take standardized tests out of high school? Then what? And I was like, what are we talking about? He referred to episode 10, so I knew it was episode 10. But episode 10 was approximately 7,000 years ago, so I had to go back and check out what episode 10 was about. Now I understand the question. The question was, episode 10 was talking about people who have low LSAT scores. And I said something in there about if you want to make the case for why your LSAT score is not predictive, the best possible way you could do it is to say, I had an SAT or an ACT of X, in the college that I went to had an ACT or SAT median of X times 2, and yet I did well, and so that shows that I have outperformed my standardized tests. You are right, Lewis, that community colleges do not require standardized test scores. And so someone who went to community college and then transfers into a four-year college to get their degree probably will not be able to make that case. That doesn't mean that I'm out of touch to give that advice. It's just that that is the gold standard. If you want to say this is why I don't think my LSAT is predictive, that's the best argument you can make. That is not an argument that will be available to everybody. So that's all I'm saying. Hope that's helpful. Not all my advice is going to be able to be utilized by all watchers or listeners. And yeah, but thanks for pointing that out. Okay, next. I have a few questions from Elliot about resumes. So, and he very flatteringly says, I have a few questions about my resume that I cannot imagine anyone being able to answer except maybe Dean Z. So you know I'm going to try to answer that. Love being flattered. If I attended a college for a year, then worked, then went back, how should I list it on my resume? Example, 2012, 2013 to 2014, or whatever it is. You don't need to, on your resume, I think you just say the year that you got your degree. You don't have to show that you were or were not in attendance in a different year for your, at least for admissions purposes, because we will have all that information through your credential assembly service report, which is what we call it, through the Law School Admissions Council. When you send in your send in your transcripts rather, they code it all up so we can see very clearly when you were and were not in school. And then in your resume, you'll just say, I got my degree 2015, and then you can show that you were working, intermittently in there. And you might want to say, for the years that you were not in school, you might want to say paren full-time so that we know that you were working full-time. And you could say in the job description, you could say on a hiatus from, on my undergrad institution, something like that. But you don't need to say it, the years of attendance for your institution in particular, if that makes sense. I wish I had like a blackboard here, like behind me, but Dustin will kill me if I stand up and start drawing on the board, so I can't do that. Hope that's clear. And now Elliot asks another question that's intriguing. He said, should I submit a resume in a pageless format so that it has no awkward page breaks? It'll still be 2 pages long, but it'll be easier to read. Just scroll down because everyone reads on a computer anyway. That I do not think will work with the LSAC system. He's suggesting Google Docs. I don't think they take Google Docs as a format. But even if they do, people still print out, people are reading online, but some people print it out. Like professors sometimes at many schools are going to be on the committee, and they love things in print. I mean, I love it too, but I've broken my habit a little bit, so I only read online now. But so I understand your point. It actually, I think, will be complicated, and I think if you're on multiple pages, you need to count on there being page breaks, and that's how it's going to show up. So I admire your creativity, but I don't think it works. So go with page breaks. Okay, final question from Elliot. Should I put anything in the heading of the resume other than my name, some recommend, phone number, city, email, etc.? Love this because, yes, I really love it when people have not just their name, but their location, like their physical location. If you don't want to give me a whole address, fine, but you could say Ann Arbor, Michigan, or wherever the heck you are. Like, I like to know, where are you? And then I do think email and phone number are useful too, because again, sometimes people will print out one element of the application. And in most cases, if you were going to print out one thing, it would be the resume. Also, sometimes if someone has been admitted and I want like a student or a faculty member to reach out to the person who's been admitted, I print out the resume, just the page of the application that's the resume. And I just think if your email or phone number are on there, that's easier for the person I am connecting. So I don't think it's not a lot of work for you. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And I think it's very convenient for the people reviewing. So yes, do that. Okay, I'm going to answer one more for now, and it is a little bit of a toughie. So we're going to end on a tough note. Dave asks, does race play a factor when considering applicants regarding DEI requirements? This topic is sensitive, but I've always wondered how this works. I'm not completely sure I understand Dave's question. So let me start by saying there are no DEI requirements. Certainly not at Michigan, but not, to my knowledge, at other schools either. Like DEI is a concept of trying to have a student population from a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different identities. That's the diversity part. Equity is making sure that within the institution you are treating people of different backgrounds fairly and equitably. And then inclusion is just if you have someone in your student body, you are making them feel like they belong, that they are included, even if they're coming from a background that is quite different from the majority of people. So that's the basic idea of DEI. So it doesn't really go with the term requirements, in my view. Then the question, though, was, does race play a factor? So I'll just, speaking for Michigan in particular, Michigan, the University of Michigan, has been race blind since 2006, so race is not a factor in our admissions process and hasn't been for that long. And then 2 years ago, the Supreme Court handed down the decision in Students for Fair Admissions, and in that they said race standing alone, like as a checkbox, that also cannot be a factor, although at the end of the opinion, Chief Justice Roberts, included something saying people might be talking about their racial background as having given them certain skills or talents or characteristics that might be valued by a school, and certainly a school can value those things, but they still can't value race like on its own, if that makes sense. So when you're writing an essay, if you want to talk about your race, you should certainly do that, but it shouldn't be like it's not a great essay to be like, I am whatever race, and therefore I think you should let me in because I will add to your diversity. Not very compelling. Much better to be like, here's why I think my racial identity is important and relevant, is because it has done X, Y, and Z for my character or for my experience or whatever it is. Even though admissions offices are not supposed to be taking race into account under the Constitution, you can still talk about your race, right? And it is on the school to figure out how to adhere to the law and to make sure it's obeying the law and to have a process in place to make sure that they are doing that. But you should be talking about whatever you want to talk about. So I'm not sure if I'm answering Dave's question or not, but Dave, please feel free to follow up if you had something more in mind. Hope that's helpful. All right. Feels like enough for now. I'm going to end with a grammar segment. Well, sort of. I'm going to tell you, why do I ever talk about grammar? Why did I talk about it for a while? I abandoned it last year, I guess, but now it's back. Why? Because grammar is at the heart, I think, of a lot of what we do as lawyers. Grammar is a sort of, it's a set of rules that can be very persnickety, and that, you can spend a lifetime learning all the rules. That is much like the law, right? And people who care about the law tend to care a lot and should care a lot about the precision of language, and grammar is very much part of the precision of language. It's the whole ball game, right, is grammar. And so if you understand the rules of grammar, you are writing better and more clearly, and people will understand you better if we can all know to adhere to certain rules. So that's why I am obsessed with grammar, and that's why I think anybody who is applying to law school should try to get themselves in a place where they too are obsessed with grammar. And so that's why I like to, give little tips. But I'm going to save my first tip for the second episode of this season. So, all right, thanks everybody for watching. Thank you to Dustin for finally cracking out that favorite lens that you've been hiding. I appreciate that. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or send an email to the admissions office at law.jd.admissions@umich.edu and put vlog in the subject line. Thank you. And wherever you go, go blue.